Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the transport ship, looking out at the strange moon below. Kepler 438c looked like a giant crystal ball floating in space. The whole surface was covered in sharp, glowing crystals that caught the light from the nearby star. It was beautiful, but Jake knew it would be dangerous. "Sir, we're ready for deployment," said Sergeant Lisa Blake as she walked up beside him. Lisa had been with Jake for 3 years now. She was tough, smart, and never backed down from a fight. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes showed she was ready for action. Jake nodded. "Good. How are the others doing?" "Ryan and Danny are checking their gear one more time," Lisa replied. Corporal Ryan Carter was their demolitions expert. He was quiet most of the time, but when things got loud, Ryan knew exactly what to do. Private Danny Walsh was the youngest member of their team. He was only 22, but he had already proven himself in 2 major battles. Jake turned away from the window and walked toward the briefing room. The transport ship was not very big, but it had to carry both human and alien soldiers. This was the first time Jake had worked with aliens, and he was not sure what to expect. The briefing room was full when Jake entered. His 3 human soldiers sat on one side of the room. On the other side sat the alien troops he would be commanding. Jake had studied their files, but seeing them in person was different. Lieutenant Zeltar was a Zephyrian. He looked almost human, but his skin was pale blue, and his eyes were completely black. Zephyrians were known for being very careful in battle. They did not like to take risks, and they always had a plan to retreat if things went wrong. Zeltar wore the standard Zephyrian uniform, which was dark blue with silver trim. Next to Zeltar sat Click Speaker Zakth, the leader of the Manthari squad. The Manthari looked like giant insects that could walk on 2 legs. Zakth was about 7 feet tall, with 4 arms and compound eyes that could see in all directions. His skin was hard like armor, and it was a dark green color. The Manthari were known for being very precise in battle, but they also did not like to take big risks. Behind Zakth H sat 5 more Manthari soldiers. They all looked similar, but Jake could tell them apart by the small marks on their armor. The Manthari did not use names like humans did. Instead, they made clicking sounds to identify each other. "Gentlemen," Jake began, looking at both the human and alien soldiers, "our mission is simple, but it will not be easy. We need to set up an observation post in the crystal canyons of Kepler 438c. The Vorthan Empire has been moving troops there, and we need to find out what they are planning." The Vorthans were the enemy. They had been fighting the Galactic Defense Alliance for over 10 years. The Vorthans were aggressive and cruel. They took over planets and enslaved the people who lived there. Earth had only joined the Alliance 6 months ago, but humans had already proven they could fight. "The crystals on this moon are very sharp," Jake continued. "They can cut through most armor if you are not careful. The gravity is lighter than Earth, so you will be able to jump higher and move faster. But that also means our enemies can do the same thing." Lieutenant Zeltar raised his hand. "Commander Morrison, what is our extraction plan if the mission goes wrong?" Jake looked at the Zephyrian officer. This was exactly what he had expected. "We will have air support standing by. But our job is to complete the mission, not to plan for failure." Zeltar's black eyes seemed to get even darker. "With respect, Commander, the Vorthans are known for setting traps. If we are surrounded, we need to have a way out." "If we get surrounded, we fight our way out," Jake replied simply. The room got very quiet. The alien soldiers looked at each other with expressions Jake could not read. Finally, Click Speaker Zakth made a series of clicking sounds and then spoke in his translated voice. "Human Commander, on my world, we have a saying, 'The wise hunter knows when to leave the prey and save the pack.' What do humans say about this?" Jake smiled slightly. We say no one gets left behind. This caused more quiet looks between the aliens. Jake could tell they did not understand human thinking. That was okay. They would learn. The dropships will take us down in 1 hour, Jake announced. Check your equipment and make sure your translators are working properly. We will be on that moon for at least a week, maybe longer. As the soldiers began to file out of the briefing room, Lisa stayed behind with Jake. They think we are crazy, she said quietly. Maybe we are, Jake replied. But crazy has worked pretty well for us so far. Lisa smiled. The Zephyrians keep asking about retreat plans. The Mantari keep talking about acceptable losses. They do not understand us at all. Jake nodded. Earth is a dangerous planet, Lisa. Most worlds in the galaxy are safe and peaceful. The aliens come from places where the weather is always nice, where there are no big predators, where nothing ever tries to kill them just for existing. And we come from a world where everything wants to kill us, Lisa finished. Exactly. They call us Deathworlders because we survived on a planet that should have killed us long ago. They think that makes us tough, but they do not really understand what it means. Jake walked over to the window again and looked down at the crystal moon. They think being tough means you can take more damage, but that is not what makes humans special. What makes us special is that we keep fighting even when we are damaged. We do not know how to quit. Lisa joined him at the window. Do you think that they will understand that? They will, Jake said confidently. Hopefully they will learn it the easy way. But if not, this mission will teach them. The transport ship shook slightly as it began to enter the moon's atmosphere. Jake could see the crystal canyons getting bigger as they got closer. The crystals were arranged in long, twisting patterns that created natural mazes. It would be perfect for setting up hidden positions, but it would also be perfect for ambushes. Attention all troops, came the voice over the intercom. Prepare for deployment in 30 minutes. Jake turned away from the window and headed toward the equipment bay. It was time to get ready for war. He had no idea that in just a few days, he would lose his arm and show the galaxy what it really meant to be human. The alien soldiers were still not sure about their human commander. They had heard stories about humans in battle, but stories were just stories. They were about to learn that when it came to humans, the stories were not even close to the truth. As Jake put on his armor and checked his weapons, he thought about his team. Lisa, Ryan, and Danny were good soldiers. They would follow him anywhere and never give up. The aliens were good soldiers too, but they followed different rules. They believed in being smart and safe. Jake believed in getting the job done, no matter what it cost. The crystal moon waited below, beautiful and deadly. Soon, it would become the place where two very different ideas about war would meet. Only one idea would prove to be stronger. The dropship landed with a soft thud on the crystal surface of Kepler 438c. Jake Morrison was the first one out, his boots crunching on the strange ground. The crystals were everywhere, sticking up from the surface like frozen lightning. Some were as tall as trees, others were small enough to step over. Stay close and watch your step, Jake called back to his team. These crystals can cut through anything. Lisa Blake jumped down from the ship next, followed by Ryan Carter and Danny Walsh. The human soldiers moved carefully, but quickly across the crystal field. They had trained for this kind of terrain, but it was still dangerous. The alien soldiers came out more slowly. Lieutenant Zeltar moved like he was walking through a minefield, checking each step before he put his weight down. The Mantari soldiers were better. Their 4 arms helped them balance as they moved between the crystals. The canyon entrance is 2 kilometers north, Jake said, looking at his map display. We need to reach it before dark. The group began moving across the crystal landscape. Jake had to admit it was beautiful. The crystals caught the light from the star and threw it back in all directions. It was like walking through a field of rainbows. But beauty could be deadly, and Jake never forgot that. "Commander," Lieutenant Zeltar said as they walked, "my sensors are picking up movement ahead. It could be Vorthan scouts." Jake stopped and held up his hand. The whole team froze in place. Jake activated his own sensors and scanned the area ahead. Sure enough, there were heat signatures moving between the larger crystals, about 500 meters away. "How many?" Jake whispered into his communication device. "I count 6 contacts," Zeltar replied. "They appear to be moving in a standard patrol pattern." Jake thought quickly. 6 Vorthans was not a big problem, but if they were scouts, there might be more nearby. The smart thing to do would be to avoid them and find another route to the canyon. That is what the aliens would want to do. But Jake had a different idea. "Ryan, can you get around to their left flank without being seen?" Jake asked. Ryan Carter nodded. "Give me 5 minutes. Danny, you go right. Lisa, you are with me. We will hit them from the front." Lieutenant Zeltar made a sound of concern. "Commander, would it not be better to avoid contact? If we attack them, they might call for help. If we let them go, they might find our landing site," Jake replied. "Better to deal with them now." Click speaker Zoth made several clicking sounds before speaking. "The human commander wishes to attack 6 enemies when we could simply avoid them. This seems like unnecessary risk." "Maybe," Jake said. "But sometimes you have to take risks to complete the mission." The alien soldiers did not look happy, but they got ready for battle. Jake could see they were good soldiers. They checked their weapons and took cover behind the crystals. But he could also see they thought this attack was a mistake. Jake did not care what they thought. He had learned a long time ago that the best way to deal with enemies was to hit them hard and fast before they knew you were coming. "Everyone in position?" Jake asked over the communication channel. "Ready," came Ryan's voice from the left. "Ready," Danny replied from the right. "Ready," Lisa said from beside Jake. "Alien forces ready," Lieutenant Zeltar said, though he still sounded worried. "Go," Jake ordered. The attack was fast and brutal. The Vorthan scouts never knew what hit them. Jake and Lisa opened fire from the front, forcing the enemies to take cover. Ryan and Danny attacked from the sides, catching the Vorthans in a crossfire. The alien soldiers provided covering fire with their precise energy weapons in less than 2 minutes. All 6 Vorthan scouts were down. Jake's team had not taken a single casualty. "Good work," Jake said as they regrouped. "Let's move to the canyon before more show up." As they walked, Jake noticed the alien soldiers looking at him differently. They had seen human tactics in action for the first time. It was not what they had expected. "Commander," Lieutenant Zeltar said, "that was very efficient. But what if there had been more enemies?" "Then we would have fought more enemies," Jake replied simply. The Zephyrian officer was quiet for a moment. "On my world, we would have observed the patrol first, learned their patterns, and then found a way around them that involved no fighting at all." "And that would have taken how long?" Jake asked. "Perhaps 6 hours. In 6 hours, they might have found our landing site, called for reinforcements, and set up an ambush," Jake pointed out. "Sometimes the fastest way is the most direct way." Click speaker Zoth made more clicking sounds. "The human way of war is very different from ours. You seem to prefer action over planning." "We prefer results over safety," Lisa Blake said, joining the conversation. "Planning is good, but plans change. When they do, you have to be ready to adapt." They reached the canyon entrance just as the sun was setting. The crystal formations created a natural maze that went deep into the moon's surface. This would be a perfect place to set up their observation post but it would also be perfect for enemies to hide. We will set up base camp here, Jake decided, pointing to a flat area surrounded by tall crystals. The crystals will hide us from above, but we can still see the approaches. The soldiers began setting up their equipment. The humans worked quickly and efficiently. They had done this many times before. The alien soldiers were more careful, double-checking everything before they considered it complete. "Commander," Ryan Carter called from his position near the canyon entrance, "I am getting some strange readings on my sensors. There is something metallic buried under the crystals about 50 meters that way." Jake walked over to look at Ryan's display. The readings showed several large metal objects hidden beneath the crystal formations. They were too big to be natural, and they were arranged in a pattern that looked deliberate. "Looks like we are not the first ones to visit this canyon," Jake said grimly. Lieutenant Zeltar came over to see what they were looking at. When he saw the readings, his pale blue skin became even paler. "Commander, those readings look like buried charges. This could be a trap." Jake studied the display more carefully. The metal objects were arranged in a circle around their position. If they were explosives, someone could trigger them and bring down half the canyon walls. "Could be," Jake agreed. "Or they could be old equipment left behind by previous patrols." "Should we not retreat to a safer position?" Zeltar asked. "No," Jake said firmly. "This is still the best position for our mission. We will just have to be careful." The alien soldiers looked at each other with expressions Jake was starting to recognize. They thought the humans were crazy for staying in a potentially dangerous position, but Jake had made his decision. "Set up the sensors and communication equipment," Jake ordered. "Double the watch schedule. If someone tries to spring a trap, I want to know about it before it happens." As night fell over the Crystal Canyon, Jake's mixed team of human and alien soldiers settled in for what they hoped would be a quiet first night. Jake stood watch on a high crystal formation, looking out over the moonlit landscape. Lisa Blake climbed up to join him. "The aliens think we are taking too many risks," she said quietly. "I know," Jake replied. "They are not wrong. We could have avoided that patrol, and we could have set up camp in a safer location. But safe is not always right," Jake said. "If we spend all our time being safe, we never get anything done. Sometimes you have to take risks to succeed." In the distance, something moved between the crystals. Jake raised his weapon and activated his night vision. For a moment, he thought he saw the outline of armored figures moving toward their position. Then the night exploded in light and sound as hidden charges detonated all around them. The trap had been sprung, and Jake's team was right in the middle of it. The real battle was about to begin, and Jake Morrison was about to learn what it truly meant to lead soldiers who came from two very different worlds. The explosions came from everywhere at once. The hidden charges that Ryan had detected earlier were not just buried explosives. They were part of a carefully planned trap that had been waiting for someone exactly like Jake's team. Jake was thrown from his observation post as the crystal formation beneath him shattered. He hit the ground hard, his armor scraping against sharp crystal fragments. Around him, the night sky was lit up with fire and falling debris. "Lisa, Ryan, Danny!" Jake shouted into his communication device, but all he got back was static. The explosions had damaged their communication system. Through the smoke and dust, Jake could see his team scattered across the canyon floor. Lisa Blake was pinned behind a fallen crystal pillar about 30 meters away. She was firing her rifle at shapes moving in the darkness, but Jake could tell she was cut off from the rest of the group. Ryan Carter was in worse trouble. A massive crystal formation had collapsed on top of him, trapping his legs under several tons of sharp rock. Jake could see Ryan trying to free himself, but the crystals were too heavy and too sharp to move safely. Danny Walsh was unconscious near the remains of their communication equipment. A piece of crystal debris had hit him in the head, and blood was running down his face. He was breathing, but he was not moving. The alien soldiers were in better positions. Lieutenant Zeltar had taken cover behind their equipment and was providing covering fire with his energy weapon. The Manthari soldiers had scattered into defensive positions among the crystals, using their natural agility to stay mobile and avoid the enemy fire. But Jake could see more problems coming. Through the smoke and chaos, he spotted the real enemy. This was not just a trap made of explosives. There were Vorthan soldiers moving through the canyon, using the confusion to get closer to his team. Jake counted at least 20 Vorthans, maybe more. They were well-armed and well-organized. This was not a random patrol like the 6 scouts they had fought earlier. This was a full combat unit that had been waiting for someone to trigger their trap. "Commander," Lieutenant Zeltar's voice came through Jake's damaged communication device. "We need to retreat. There are too many of them." Jake looked around the battlefield. Zeltar was right. The smart thing to do would be to pull back, regroup, and call for air support. That is what any reasonable military commander would do when faced with superior numbers and wounded soldiers. But Jake Morrison was not any reasonable military commander. He was a human from Earth, and humans did not abandon their wounded. "Negative," Jake replied. "We hold this position until everyone is evacuated." "Commander, that is not tactically sound." Zeltar protested. "We can call for air support and return for the wounded later." Jake did not answer. Instead, he began moving toward Ryan Carter's position. The Vorthans were closing in, and Jake could see that Ryan would be dead in minutes if someone did not help him. Jake ran in a low crouch, using the crystal formations for cover. Enemy fire sparked off the crystals around him, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. One piece of crystal cut across his cheek, leaving a line of blood. But Jake did not slow down. He reached Ryan's position just as 3 Vorthan soldiers were moving in for the kill. Jake opened fire with his assault rifle, catching the first Vorthan in the chest. The enemy soldier went down, but the other 2 took cover and began firing back. "Jake," Ryan called out weakly. "My legs are pinned. I cannot move." Jake could see that Ryan's situation was bad. The crystal formation that had fallen on him was huge, and Ryan's legs were trapped underneath. There was blood pooling around the crystals, which meant Ryan was badly hurt. "Hold on," Jake said, reloading his weapon. "I am going to get you out of there." But before Jake could start moving the crystals, the Vorthans made their next move. A plasma cannon opened fire from somewhere high up on the canyon wall. The first shot missed, but it hit a crystal formation directly above Jake, and Ryan. Jake looked up and saw the massive crystal structure beginning to crack and fall. There was no time to think, only time to react. Jake threw himself over Ryan, trying to shield his wounded soldier from the falling debris. The crystal formation came down like a deadly avalanche. Most of the smaller pieces bounced off Jake's armor, but one massive crystal shard, as big as a sword and just as sharp, came spinning through the air like a blade. Jake saw it coming. For a split second, he thought about moving away, about saving himself and leaving Ryan to face the falling crystal alone. It was the kind of decision that could mean the difference between life and death. But Jake Morrison was human, and humans did not make decisions like that. The crystal shard hit Jake's left shoulder with the force of a sledgehammer. The sharp edge cut through his armor like it was paper, then cut through skin, muscle, and bone just as easily. Jake felt his arm separate from his body at the shoulder, spinning away into the darkness. The pain was beyond anything Jake had ever experienced. It felt like being struck by lightning and hit by a truck at the same time. For a moment, Jake's vision went white, and he thought he might pass out. But Jake Morrison did not pass out. Instead, he rolled off Ryan and immediately began applying pressure to his wound with his remaining hand. He had trained for this kind of injury, though he had never expected to use that training on himself. "Commander," Lieutenant Zeltar's voice came through the communication device. "Your vital signs are critical. You need immediate medical evacuation." Jake ignored the alien officer. With his remaining hand, he pulled a tourniquet from his medical kit and wrapped it around his shoulder. The bleeding slowed, but did not stop completely. Jake then injected himself with combat stimulants that would keep him conscious and functional despite the massive trauma. "Jake, you are hurt bad," Ryan said, staring at where Jake's arm used to be. "You need to get out of here." "Nobody gets left behind," Jake replied through gritted teeth. "That includes you." Using his remaining arm, Jake began trying to move the crystals that were trapping Ryan. It was slow work with only one hand, and every movement sent waves of agony through Jake's body. But he kept working. The alien soldiers watched in amazement. Lieutenant Zeltar had never seen anything like it. On his world, a soldier who lost a limb would immediately be evacuated from the battlefield. The idea of continuing to fight with such a severe injury was beyond his understanding. Click speaker. Zokt H made rapid clicking sounds to his fellow Manthari soldiers. They had heard stories about human warriors who continued fighting even when badly wounded, but they had thought the stories were exaggerated. Now they were seeing it with their own eyes. "Commander Morrison," Zeltar called over the communication channel. "Please accept evacuation. We can hold the position until you return." "No," Jake replied, still working to free Ryan. "We complete the mission together, or we do not complete it at all." More Vorthan soldiers were moving toward their position. Jake could see them getting closer, but he could not stop working on freeing Ryan. If he stopped now, Ryan would die, and Jake would rather die himself than let that happen. The battle was far from over, and Jake Morrison was about to show the galaxy what it really meant when humans refused to quit. Jake Morrison had lost his left arm, but he had not lost his mind. As more Vorthan soldiers moved toward their position, Jake's brain began working faster than ever. Pain and blood loss might have slowed his body, but they had sharpened his tactical thinking to a razor edge. "Lisa," Jake called out over the communication channel. "Can you reach Danny?" "Working on it," Lisa Blake replied, firing at two Vorthans who were trying to flank her position. "He is starting to wake up." Jake felt relief wash over him. If Danny was waking up, that meant his head injury was not as bad as it had looked. Jake needed every soldier he could get for what was coming next. Using his remaining arm, Jake managed to move enough crystals to free Ryan's right leg. But Ryan's left leg was still trapped, and Jake could see it was badly crushed. Ryan would not be walking out of this canyon, but at least he was no longer in immediate danger of bleeding to death. "Ryan, can you use your rifle?" Jake asked. Ryan Carter tested his arms and found they still worked. "Yeah, I can shoot." "But Jake, you need medical attention. You are losing too much blood." Jake looked down at his shoulder. The tourniquet had slowed the bleeding, but it had not stopped it completely. His combat stimulants were keeping him conscious, but he knew he did not have much time before his body began to shut down. "I will worry about that later," Jake said. "Right now, we have bigger problems." Jake activated his tactical display and began counting enemy positions. The Vorthans had them surrounded, but they were being careful not to get too close. They knew the humans and aliens were trapped, and they were probably waiting for reinforcements before making their final attack. That gave Jake an idea. "Lieutenant Zeltar," Jake called over the communication channel. "How accurate are your energy?" "Weapons at long range? Very accurate, Commander." "Why do you ask?" "I need you to target the crystal formations on the canyon walls. Not the Vorthans, the crystals themselves." There was a pause before Zeltar replied. "Commander, if we bring down those crystal formations, we could cause avalanches that might hurt our own people. That is the idea, Jake said grimly. The Vorthans think they have us trapped in here. Let's show them what trapped really looks like. Jake began giving orders to his mixed team of human and alien soldiers. His plan was dangerous and required perfect timing, but it was their only chance to survive. Lisa, when I give the signal, you and Danny lay down covering fire on the Vorthans to our east. Make them think we are trying to break out in that direction. Got it, Lisa replied. Manthari soldiers, I need you to use your speed to get to higher positions on the canyon walls. When the Zephyrians bring down the crystal formations, you will have clear shots at any Vorthans who survive the avalanches. Click speaker Zoxth made several clicking sounds before responding. This is a very dangerous plan, human commander. If the timing is wrong, we could all be buried under falling crystals. If we do nothing, we will all be dead in an hour anyway, Jake pointed out. Sometimes you have to choose between a bad plan and no plan at all. Jake wedged his rifle against a crystal formation so he could fire it with only one hand. The weapon was designed to be used with both hands, but Jake had adapted quickly to his new limitation. He would not be as accurate as before, but he could still fight. Everyone ready? Jake asked. Human forces ready, Lisa replied. Zephyrian forces ready, Lieutenant Zeltar said, though Jake could hear the worry in his voice. Manthari forces ready, click speaker Zoxth confirmed. Execute, Jake ordered. The plan worked perfectly. Lisa and Danny opened fire on the eastern Vorthans, making them think the trapped soldiers were trying to fight their way out. As the Vorthans moved to counter this apparent escape attempt, the Zephyrian soldiers began targeting the crystal formations high on the canyon walls. The first energy blast hit a massive crystal pillar about 50 meters above the main group of Vorthan soldiers. The pillar cracked, but did not fall. The second blast hit it again, and this time the entire formation began to collapse. Jake watched as tons of sharp crystal came crashing down on the Vorthan positions. The enemy soldiers tried to run, but they were caught in the open with nowhere to hide. The avalanche buried at least half of them instantly, but Jake's plan was not finished yet. As the dust from the first avalanche began to settle, the Manthari soldiers opened fire from their high positions on the canyon walls. Their precise shots picked off the Vorthans who had survived the falling crystals. In less than 5 minutes. Jake had turned a hopeless situation into a tactical victory. The surviving Vorthans were scattered and confused, no longer able to coordinate their attack. Outstanding work. Lieutenant Zeltar called over the communication channel. Commander, your tactical thinking is remarkable. Jake smiled grimly. The battle is not over yet. There are still Vorthans out there, and they will be calling for reinforcements. As if to prove Jake's point, more enemy soldiers began appearing at the canyon entrance. These were fresh troops, and they looked better equipped than the first group. Jake counted at least 15 more Vorthans, and they were carrying heavy weapons. Commander, Ryan Carter called from his position behind the fallen crystals, I am picking up communication signals. The Vorthans are calling for air support. Jake felt his heart sink. His team could handle ground troops, even with their injuries. But if the Vorthans brought in aircraft, the situation would become impossible. How long before their air support arrives? Jake asked. Maybe 30 minutes, Ryan replied, monitoring the enemy communications. Jake looked around at his team. Benny Walsh was back on his feet, though he still had a bandage around his head. Lisa Blake was in good shape and ready to keep fighting. The alien soldiers were uninjured and had proven they could follow orders even when those orders seemed crazy. But Jake himself was getting weaker. The blood loss from his missing arm was starting to affect his vision, and his remaining hand was beginning to shake. The combat stimulants were wearing off, and he knew he could not last much longer without medical treatment. Lieutenant Ziltar, Jake said quietly over a private communication channel. If something happens to me, you take command of the mission. Commander. You are not going to die, Ziltar replied firmly. We will get you medical attention as soon as we can call for evacuation. Maybe, Jake said. But if I go down, you need to complete the mission. The observation post needs to be established, and the intelligence about Vorthan troop movements needs to get back to headquarters. Understood, Commander. But you are not going to die. Not on my watch. Jake was surprised by the determination in the alien officer's voice. When they had first met, Ziltar had seemed cautious and reluctant to take risks. Now he sounded like a soldier who was ready to fight to the end. The new group of Vorthans began their attack just as the sun started to rise over the Crystal Canyon. They had learned from the mistakes of the first group and were being much more careful about their approach. But Jake Morrison was still thinking, still planning, still fighting. He might have lost his arm, but he had not lost his determination to protect his soldiers and complete his mission. The longest battle of Jake's life was about to begin, and he was going to show the galaxy that humans never gave up, no matter how bad things got. The second wave of Vorthan soldiers was smarter than the first. They did not charge directly into the canyon where Jake's team could bring down more crystal formations on top of them. Instead, they spread out and began a careful advance, using the crystal maze for cover. Jake Morrison watched them through his rifle scope, his remaining hand steady despite the massive blood loss. He had been fighting for 6 hours now, and his body was running on pure determination. The combat stimulants had worn off long ago, but Jake refused to give up. Commander, Lieutenant Ziltar called softly over the communication channel. Your vital signs are becoming critical. Please allow us to call for medical evacuation. Not until everyone is safe, Jake replied, his voice weaker than before, but still firm. The alien officer had stopped arguing with Jake about evacuation. Over the past 6 hours, Ziltar had seen something he never thought possible. He had watched a soldier continue to fight effectively while suffering from what should have been a completely disabling injury. Jake had adapted his tactics to work with only one arm. He wedged his rifle against crystal formations to steady it for long-range shots. He used grenades in ways that maximized their effect while requiring minimal throwing strength. Most importantly, he continued to coordinate his team's movements and plan their defense strategies. Danny, can you get to that high position on the right wall? Jake asked, pointing to a crystal ledge about 20 meters up the canyon wall. I can make it, Danny Walsh replied. The young soldier had recovered from his head injury and was eager to prove himself. Good. Lisa, you take the left wall. I want crossfire coverage over the entire canyon floor. What about you? Lisa Blake asked, looking worried about Jake's condition. I will coordinate from here with Ryan, Jake said. We can provide supporting fire and call out enemy positions. Jake's plan was working. Even with only one arm, he was still thinking 3 steps ahead of his enemies. The Vorthans were being cautious, but that caution was giving Jake's team time to set up better defensive positions. Click speaker. Zakt Etch and his Manpari soldiers had taken positions among the crystal formations, where their natural agility gave them the best advantage. They could move quickly from cover to cover, appearing to shoot at the Vorthans, and then disappearing before return fire could find them. Commander, Zakt Etch called over the communication channel. The enemy is setting up heavy weapons at the canyon entrance. They appear to be preparing for a major assault. Jake looked through his scope and saw what the Manthari leader was talking about. The Vorthans had brought in plasma cannons and were positioning them to blast through the crystal. Formations that provided cover for Jake's team. How long before their air support arrives? Jake asked Ryan. 15 minutes, maybe less, Ryan replied. still monitoring enemy communications despite his crushed legs. Jake made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of preparing for a defensive battle, he decided to attack. "All units, listen carefully," Jake said over the communication channel. "We are going to advance on their positions." "Commander," Lieutenant Zeltar protested, "that is suicide. You are badly wounded. Ryan cannot walk, and we are outnumbered 3-1. "Exactly," Jake replied. "They will never expect us to attack. Lisa, Danny, I need you to provide covering fire from the high positions. Alien forces, we are going to hit them fast and hard before they can set up those plasma cannons." Jake stood up from his covered position, swaying slightly from blood loss, but still upright. He held his rifle in his remaining hand and began walking toward the enemy positions. The alien soldiers stared in amazement. This was beyond anything they had ever seen before. A human soldier, missing an arm and losing blood, was walking directly toward a superior enemy force and expecting his team to follow him. But follow him they did. Lieutenant Zeltar was the first to move. The careful, cautious Zephyrian officer stepped out from behind his cover and began advancing alongside the wounded human commander. If Jake Morrison could fight with one arm, then Zeltar could fight beside him. The Manthari soldiers followed next. Click Speaker Zokth made rapid clicking sounds that roughly translated to, "Follow the crazy human." He might actually know what he is doing. The attack caught the Vorthans completely off guard. They had been setting up for a siege, not expecting the trapped soldiers to come charging at them. Jake's team hit the enemy positions while the Vorthans were still trying to figure out what was happening. Jake fired his rifle one-handed, using short, controlled bursts that conserved ammunition while still hitting targets. His accuracy was not as good as it had been with two hands, but it was still deadly effective. Lieutenant Zeltar's energy weapon carved through Vorthan battle armor like it was paper. The Zephyrian officer had learned from watching Jake that sometimes aggression was more effective than caution. The Manthari soldiers used their speed and agility to get behind enemy positions, attacking from angles the Vorthans had not expected. Their precise shooting eliminated the Vorthan heavy weapons teams before the plasma cannons could be fully deployed. The battle lasted only 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, the canyon was quiet except for the sound of Jake's team catching their breath. "All enemies down," Danny reported from his high position. "Canyon secure," Lisa added from the opposite wall. Jake finally allowed himself to sit down on a fallen crystal. His vision was getting blurry, and his remaining hand was shaking badly. He had pushed his body far beyond its limits, and it was finally starting to shut down. "Now, can we call for medical evacuation?" Lieutenant Zeltar asked, kneeling beside Jake. "Mission first," Jake said weakly. "Did we get the intelligence data?" "Yes, Commander," Ryan called from his position. "I recorded all Vorthan communications and troop movements. The observation post equipment is set up and functioning." "Good," Jake said, and then he passed out. Jake woke up 3 days later in a medical facility on the Alliance space station. His left arm was gone, but the doctors had fitted him with an advanced prosthetic that looked and felt almost like the real thing. "About time you woke up," Lisa Blake said from a chair beside his bed. "The alien commanders have been wanting to talk to you." "How is the team?" Jake asked. "Ryan will be fine. His legs are healing well. Danny just has a small scar on his forehead." Everyone else came through without serious injuries. A few minutes later, Lieutenant Zeltar and Click Speaker Zokth entered Jake's room. Both alien officers looked different somehow. They stood straighter, with more confidence than Jake remembered. "Commander Morrison," Zeltar said formally, "I have been instructed by Zephyrian High Command to inform you that your tactical methods will now be taught in our military academies. The Mantari Council of War wishes to establish joint training programs with human forces, Zach added. We have much to learn from your approach to combat. Jake smiled. What approach is that? The approach that says some things are worth any sacrifice, Zeltar replied. On my world, we were taught that the highest military virtue is preserving your forces. But you taught us that sometimes preserving your principles is more important than preserving your life. Your species has a saying, Zach added. No one gets left behind. We understand now that this is not just a motto. It is a way of thinking that makes you stronger, not weaker. 6 months later, Jake Morrison was promoted to colonel and given command of the first integrated human-alien special operations unit in the Galactic Defense Alliance. His prosthetic arm worked perfectly, and his tactical skills had only improved with experience. The Crystal Canyon on Kepler 438c was now a permanent Alliance observation post, exactly as the mission had required. But more importantly, it had become a symbol of what different species could accomplish when they fought together. Jake often thought about that day in the canyon, when he had lost his arm, but gained something much more valuable. He had shown the galaxy that humans were not just tough because they came from a dangerous world. They were tough because they refused to abandon their values, even when those values put them at risk. The aliens called humans Deathworlders because Earth was a dangerous planet. But Jake knew the truth was more complicated than that. Humans were not dangerous because their world was dangerous. Humans were dangerous because they had learned that some things were worth dying for, and even more worth living for. In the end, that was the lesson that Jake Morrison had taught to the galaxy in a crystal canyon on a distant moon. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to quit, even when quitting would be the smart thing to do. The galaxy was a safer place, because humans understood that simple truth, and now the aliens understood it too.